The space station hummed with a quiet efficiency that kept thousands of different species alive in the cold void between stars. Nexus 7 was one of the largest diplomatic hubs in this sector of the galaxy, a massive spinning wheel of metal and glass where dozens of alien civilizations conducted their business far from their homeworlds. Sarah Martinez wiped down another table in the station's main dining hall, her human hands moving in practiced circles across the smooth surface. The cleaning cloth made soft squeaking sounds against the metal, a rhythm she had grown used to over the past 3 years. Around her, the massive hall buzzed with conversation in dozens of languages, some spoken, others transmitted through electronic devices, and a few communicated through color changes in skin or specialized appendages. She paused for a moment to watch a group of Thelian diplomats at a nearby table. Their blue, crystalline skin caught the artificial light beautifully, casting small rainbows across the table's surface as they gestured while speaking. Their voices sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Sarah had always found the Thelians fascinating, though she had never spoken to one directly. Her job as a maintenance worker and part-time server kept her mostly invisible to the important beings who frequented this place. That was fine with her. Sarah had come to Nexus 7 not seeking glory or adventure, but simply because she needed work and the station paid well for human labor. Humans were considered excellent at detailed tasks, and their ability to adapt to different environments made them valuable workers in the diverse ecosystem of an interstellar station. She moved to the next table, where crumbs from some kind of crystallized fruit lay scattered across the surface. As she cleaned, she could hear fragments of conversation from the diplomatic tables around her. Talk of trade agreements, territorial disputes, and resource allocation filled the air. These were the conversations that shaped the galaxy, and Sarah was just the woman who cleaned up after them. The dining hall began to empty as the afternoon shift ended and evening approached. Sarah worked her way through the remaining tables, her mind wandering to the message she had received from Earth that morning. Her sister was getting married next month, and the wedding photos she had sent showed a beautiful ceremony in their hometown park. Sarah felt a familiar pang of homesickness, but pushed it down. She had chosen this life, and the money she was saving would eventually let her return home with enough credits to start her own business. As she lifted a chair to clean beneath the table, she heard something that made her stop. It was a sound unlike any of the usual diplomatic chatter or casual conversation that filled the hall. It was soft, rhythmic, and heartbreakingly familiar despite coming from a being she had never encountered before. Crying. Someone was crying. Sarah set the chair down gently and listened more carefully. The sound was coming from behind one of the large decorative plants that separated the dining area from the waiting lounge. She moved quietly in that direction, her cleaning supplies forgotten for the moment. Behind the broad leaves of a Vortanian fern, she found the source of the crying. It was a small Thelian child, no more than 4 feet tall, her crystalline skin flickering with deep purples and blues that Sarah instinctively understood meant sadness. The child was curled up in one of the lounge chairs, her thin arms wrapped around her knees, and the sound coming from her was like tiny bells breaking. Sarah had seen Thelian children before, but always from a distance and always accompanied by adults. This little one was alone, and the way she cried spoke of a deep, frightening loneliness that transcended species barriers. For several moments, Sarah hesitated. Protocol dictated that she should contact station security if she found an unaccompanied minor of any species. But something about the child's posture, the way she had hidden herself behind the plant, suggested that maybe she didn't want to be found by officials. Maybe she needed something else. Sarah approached slowly, making sure her footsteps were audible so she wouldn't startle the child. When she was about 6 feet away, she knelt down to make herself appear less imposing and cleared her throat gently. The crying stopped immediately. The little Thelian's head snapped up, and Sarah found herself looking into large, multifaceted eyes that reflected light like prisms. For a moment, neither of them moved. "Hello there," Sarah said softly, using the universal translator built into her work badge. The device would convert her words into basic Thelian, though she knew it might not catch all the nuances. "Are you okay?" The child stared at her for a long moment, her skin cycling through colors that Sarah didn't recognize. Then, in a voice that was barely audible, she spoke in accented but clear Standard Galactic. "I cannot find my mother." Sarah felt her heart clench. Even across the vast differences between their species, the loss in the child's voice was unmistakable. "When did you last see her?" Sarah asked, moving a little closer but still maintaining a respectful distance. "This morning," the child replied, her skin now showing streaks of deep blue mixed with silver. "She said she had to attend an important meeting. She told me to wait in our quarters and that she would return before evening meal. But she has not come back, and the door will not respond to my biosignature anymore." Sarah frowned. That didn't sound right. Diplomatic quarters on Nexus 7 were secured, but they were programmed to recognize all registered occupants at all times. The only reason a door wouldn't respond to a child's biosignature was if the room had been officially vacated or if there was some kind of security lockdown. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Sarah asked, unconsciously using the same tone she used when talking to her young nieces back on Earth. "Zerval this," the child replied, pronouncing each syllable carefully. "But my mother calls me Zura." "That's a beautiful name." "I'm Sada. I work here on the station." Sarah shifted to sit cross-legged on the floor, bringing herself down to the child's eye level. "Zara, can you tell me what your mother's name is? Maybe I can help you find her." Zara's skin flickered through several colors before settling on a pale blue. "Her name is Ambassador Velvis Prima. She is here for the Resource Allocation Council meetings. She is very important." There was pride in the little girl's voice, but also fear. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard that name before, had seen on the station's daily briefings that were posted for all staff. Ambassador Velvis Prima had been scheduled to present a crucial proposal about mining rights in the Outer Rim territories. But Sarah distinctly remembered seeing an emergency notification that morning about a diplomatic incident involving one of the Thelian representatives. She tried to keep her voice calm and reassuring. "Zara, I'm going to help you find your mother, okay? But first, have you eaten anything today?" The child shook her head, her skin now showing streaks of yellow that Sarah guessed might indicate hunger or physical discomfort. "All right, let's get you something to eat, and then we'll figure out what happened to your mother." Sarah stood up slowly, extending her hand toward Zara. "Is it okay if I help you?" Zara looked at Sarah's outstretched hand for a moment, then reached out with her own. Her skin was warm and smooth, with a texture like polished stone. When their hands touched, Sarah felt a strange, tingling sensation, as if Zara's crystalline biology was somehow reading her intentions. They walked together to the serving area, where Sarah used her staff privileges to get Zara a bowl of nutrition broth that was safe for Thelian physiology. As Zara ate, Sarah discreetly accessed one of the staff terminals and searched for information about Ambassador Velvis Prima. What she found made her stomach sink. According to the classified briefings, Ambassador Velvis Prima had been arrested that morning on charges of espionage and treason against the Galactic Council. The charges had been filed by the human delegation, and the ambassador was currently being held in the station's maximum security detention facility, pending extradition to Earth for trial. Sarah stared at the screen, her mind reeling. Zara's mother wasn't just missing. She was in serious legal trouble, the kind that could result in life imprisonment or worse. And here was this little girl, alone and afraid, with no idea that her world had just been turned upside down. She looked back at Zara, who was carefully sipping her broth and looking around the dining hall with wide, curious eyes. Despite her sadness, there was something inherently trusting about her demeanor. She had accepted Sarah's help without question, and now she was waiting patiently for Sarah to make everything right. But how could Sarah possibly make this right? She was just a maintenance worker, a human with no diplomatic status or authority. Even if she could somehow help Zara find her mother, what would happen when the child learned the truth? What would happen to Zara herself? Sarah realized that she had stumbled into something far more complicated and dangerous than a simple case of a lost child. The political implications alone were staggering. If the human delegation had arranged for the arrest of a Thelian ambassador, it meant that tensions between the two species were much higher than the general public knew. And Zara, innocent as she was, had become collateral damage in a conflict she couldn't possibly understand. As these thoughts raced through her mind, Sarah became aware that Zara was watching her intently, her skin now showing patterns of deep purple mixed with silver, colors that Sarah was beginning to understand meant confusion and fear. "Sarah," Zara said softly, "you have the same expression my mother gets when she receives difficult communications from home. Is something wrong?" Sarah forced herself to smile, though she knew it probably looked strained. "Nothing's wrong, sweetie. I'm just thinking about the best way to help you find your mother." But even as she said the words, Sarah knew that finding Veldis Prima wasn't going to be the hard part. The hard part was going to be figuring out what to do when they did. Zara finished her broth and looked up at Sarah expectantly. In her multifaceted eyes, Sarah could see complete trust, the kind of trust that only a child could offer, innocent and absolute. It was the kind of trust that demanded everything in return. Sarah made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. She couldn't just hand this child over to station security and walk away. She couldn't let Zara become just another casualty of interspecies politics. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, she was going to protect this little girl and help her understand what had happened to her mother. But first, she needed to know exactly what Ambassador Veldis Prima had been accused of and whether there was any chance the charges might be false. Because if there was even a possibility that Zara's mother was innocent, then Sarah was going to do everything in her power to prove it. "Come on, Zara," Sarah said, standing up and extending her hand again. "Let's go somewhere more private where we can talk. I have some things I need to explain to you, and I want to make sure you understand everything that's happening." As they walked together toward the service corridors that would lead to Sarah's small quarters, Sarah found herself making a mental promise to the little girl beside her. She didn't know how she was going to keep it, but she was going to try. Whatever it took, she was going to make sure that Zara didn't face this alone. The corridor lights dimmed as they walked, signaling the beginning of the station's night cycle. Around them, Nexus 7 settled into its quieter rhythm, unaware that in the space of one afternoon, the lives of a human maintenance worker and a Thelian child had become inextricably linked by circumstances neither of them could have predicted. Sarah's quarters were small, but comfortable, designed for human proportions with a narrow bed, a desk, and a small seating area near the single window that looked out into the star-filled void. Zara stood in the doorway for a moment, her crystalline skin shifting through pale yellows and oranges as she took in the unfamiliar environment. "You can sit anywhere you'd like," Sarah said, gesturing toward the cushioned chair near the window. "Would you like some water or juice?" Zara moved to the chair, but didn't sit down immediately. Instead, she walked to the window and pressed her small hands against the transparent aluminum, staring out at the stars. "My mother always says that each star has the potential to harbor life," she said quietly. "She says that somewhere out there might be another little girl like me, looking up at our sun and wondering what lives here." Sarah felt her throat tighten. She needed to tell Zara the truth about her mother, but how did you explain concepts like espionage and treason to a child? How did you tell someone so young that their world had just collapsed? "Zara," Sarah said gently, settling onto the edge of her bed, so she was facing the little girl. "I need to tell you something important about your mother. But first, I need you to know that whatever happens, I'm going to help you. Do you understand?" Zara turned away from the window, her eyes reflecting the starlight like tiny prisms. Her skin had shifted to a deep blue color that Sarah was beginning to associate with serious attention. "Is my mother hurt?" she asked. "No, she's not hurt. But she is in trouble." Sarah chose her words carefully. Sometimes when different groups of people or different species try to work together, they don't always agree about things. Sometimes these disagreements become very serious. Zara's skin began to show streaks of silver mixed with the blue. "My mother told me that her job is to help our people and the humans find ways to share resources fairly. She said it was important work because both of our species need the same kinds of materials to build our ships and our homes. That's right, Sarah said. But some people think your mother was doing more than just negotiating for resources. They think she was trying to get information that she wasn't supposed to have. Information about what? Sarah had accessed more detailed files after bringing Zara to her quarters, and what she had found was troubling. The charges against Ambassador Velvis Prima centered around allegations that she had been secretly copying human technological specifications for advanced propulsion systems. The evidence appeared to include encrypted data found in her personal communication device and testimony from a human technician who claimed she had attempted to bribe him for classified information. But as Sarah read through the reports, something felt wrong. The timeline didn't make sense. The alleged incidents had occurred during periods when the ambassador had been in documented meetings with other diplomats. The evidence seemed almost too convenient, and the human technician who had provided testimony had a history of financial problems that could make him susceptible to bribes himself. They think she was trying to learn about human technology that was supposed to be secret, Sarah explained. But, Zara, I've been reading about what happened, and I'm not sure the people who accuse your mother are telling the truth. Zara's skin cycled through several colors before settling on a pattern Sarah hadn't seen before. Deep purple with flecks of gold. My mother would never steal anything, she said with quiet certainty. She always tells me that the only way to build trust between different peoples is through honesty and fairness. I believe you, Sarah said, and she realized that she really did. There was something about Zara's absolute faith in her mother that convinced Sarah more than any evidence could have. Children were often excellent judges of character, and Zara clearly saw her mother as someone incapable of deception. But even if Velvis Prima was innocent, proving it would be nearly impossible. The diplomatic machinery had already been set in motion, and challenging the charges would require resources and authority that Sarah simply didn't have. "Where's my mother now?" Zara asked. Sarah hesitated, then decided that Zara deserved the truth. "She's being held in the station's security facility. She's not allowed to have visitors right now, and they're planning to take her to Earth for a trial." Zara's skin went completely pale, almost translucent. For a moment, Sarah was afraid the child might faint, but then color began to flow back into her crystalline features. Not the blues and purples of sadness, but brilliant reds and oranges that Sarah instinctively recognized as anger. "That's not fair," Zara said, her voice rising. "She hasn't done anything wrong. They can't just take her away from me." "You're right. It's not fair," Sarah agreed. "And that's why I'm going to help you." "Ow!" Zara demanded, her skin still blazing with indignant colors. "You said yourself that you're just a maintenance worker. What can you do against the people who make decisions for entire species?" It was a fair question, and Sarah didn't have a good answer. What did she do? She had no political connections, no legal training, and no authority to challenge diplomatic decisions. But she had something else, something that the diplomats and politicians had forgotten in their rush to assign blame and allocate consequences. She had a fundamental belief that what was happening to Zara was wrong, and she had a stubborn refusal to let that wrongness stand unchallenged. "I don't know yet," Sarah admitted, "but I have some ideas. First, though, I need to know more about your mother's work here. Did she ever mention any problems with the other diplomats? Anyone who might have wanted to make her look bad?" Zara thought for a moment, her skin shifting to a softer orange as her anger was replaced by concentration. "She was worried about someone," she said slowly. "A few days ago, she received a message that upset her very much. When I asked her about it, she said that some people were more interested in stopping cooperation than in finding solutions." "Did she say who sent the message?" "No, but—" Zara hesitated, then continued. "I was supposed to be sleeping, but I heard her talking to someone on her communication device that night. She was speaking in our formal dialect, which she only uses when she's very serious. I heard her say that if certain people continued to sabotage the negotiations for personal gain, she would have no choice but to expose their true motivations to the council." Sarah felt a surge of excitement. If Velvis Prima had been threatening to expose someone else's wrongdoing, that would provide a clear motive for framing her. But who had she been talking to, and what kind of sabotage had she discovered? Zara, this is very important. Did your mother keep records of her communications? A personal log or diary? Yes, she keeps detailed records of everything. She told me it was important for historians to understand how different species learned to work together. Zara's expression became troubled. But all of her personal belongings are in our quarters, and I can't get in. Sarah stood up and began pacing the small room, her mind working through possibilities. The station's security systems were sophisticated, but they weren't perfect. More importantly, they were maintained by people like her, people who understood how the technology worked and, occasionally, how it could be circumvented. Zara, I need to ask you to trust me about something. If I could get into your mother's quarters and find her records, would you be willing to help me look through them? It might be the only way to prove she's innocent. Zara's skin brightened immediately, cycling through hopeful yellows and golds. Yes, but how can we get in? The security systems won't recognize me anymore. Leave that to me, Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. But first, I need to make sure you'll be safe while I'm working on this. I can't leave you alone, but I can't take you with me either. Sarah thought about the resources available to her. As a maintenance worker, she had access to most areas of the station, but she also had contacts among the other service staff, people who understood what it was like to be invisible to the important beings who shaped galactic policy. There's someone I want you to meet, Sarah said. Her name is Elena, and she works in the child care center for diplomatic families. She's helped take care of children from dozens of different species, and she's one of the kindest people I know. Zara looked uncertain. Will she understand about my mother? Elena understands about justice, Sarah said, and she understands about protecting children. That's all that matters right now. 20 minutes later, they were walking through the station's residential corridors toward the child care center. Sarah had sent Elena a message using the staff communication system, explaining the situation in carefully coded language. Elena's response had been immediate and unambiguous. Bring the child immediately, and don't worry about the politics. Elena Vasquez was a short, round woman in her 50s who had been working with alien children for over a decade. She had originally come to Nexus 7 as part of a cultural exchange program, but had ended up staying when she realized how much the diplomatic community needed someone who could care for children from multiple species. She met them at the center's entrance, her warm brown eyes taking in Zara's crystalline features and shifting skin colors with professional interest and obvious compassion. Hello, beautiful, Elena said, addressing Zara directly. Her universal translator was set to a child-friendly mode that would convey warmth and kindness along with the words. Sarah told me you might need a safe place to stay for a while. Zara looked between Sarah and Elena, her skin showing cautious purples mixed with curious yellows. Are you going to take care of me while Sarah helps my mother? If you'd like me to, Elena said. I have some other children staying here right now. A young Vortanian whose parents are in trade negotiations, and 2 Centauri twins whose father is working on the new shipping treaties. Would you like to meet them? Zara nodded slowly, then looked back at Sarah. You will come back for me? I promise, Sarah said, kneeling down to look Zara in the eye. No matter what happens, I will not abandon you. As Sarah watched Elena lead Zara into the child care center, she felt the full weight of the promise she had just made. She was about to commit what would technically be several serious crimes, breaking into diplomatic quarters, accessing classified information, and interfering with an ongoing legal proceeding. If she was caught, she would face imprisonment and deportation at the very least. But as she thought about Zara's trust-filled eyes and the absolute faith the little girl had placed in her, Sarah realized that she had passed the point where such considerations mattered. Sometimes, she thought, the most important promises were the ones that required you to risk everything to keep them. The first step was getting into Ambassador Velvis Prima's quarters, and Sarah had an idea about how to do that. The station's maintenance schedules were coordinated through a central system that she had access to as part of her job. If she could create a legitimate work order for repairs in the diplomatic section, she could get into the corridor legally. From there, it would just be a matter of bypassing a single door lock, something she had done before when diplomats had locked themselves out of their quarters. But first, she needed to understand exactly what she was looking for. If Velvis Prima had been investigating someone else's wrongdoing, there would be evidence of it in her personal files. And if Sarah could find that evidence, she might be able to prove that the ambassador had been framed by someone who had their own reasons for wanting her silenced. As Sarah made her way to the maintenance offices to begin planning her illegal entry into the diplomatic quarters, she thought about the irony of her situation. She had come to Nexus 7 to escape complications and live a simple life. Now she was about to become involved in what could be the most significant diplomatic incident in recent history. But she had made a promise to a crying alien child, and that promise was going to be kept no matter what the cost. The maintenance tunnels that ran through Nexus 7 were Sarah's domain. She had spent countless hours crawling through the narrow passages that carried power cables, atmosphere recyclers, and communication lines throughout the massive station. Tonight, those same tunnels would serve a very different purpose. Sarah moved carefully through the dimly lit passage, her portable scanner in one hand and a small toolkit in the other. The diplomatic section was heavily secured, but every security system had maintenance access points, places where technicians could perform repairs without compromising the integrity of the protected areas. She had spent the previous day carefully studying the layout of Ambassador Velvis Prima's quarters and the surrounding security systems. The room was protected by biometric locks, motion sensors, and communication monitoring, but all of those systems needed power and data connections. And those connections had to be accessible for maintenance. The access panel she was looking for was located in a junction box approximately 3 meters above the diplomatic corridor, hidden behind a section of decorative paneling that most beings would never notice. Sarah had helped install the panel 2 years ago during a station-wide security upgrade. Working quickly but carefully, Sarah removed the panel and examined the connections inside. The biometric lock for Velvis Prima's quarters was controlled by a small processor that received its instructions through a fiber optic data line. If she could interrupt that line temporarily and substitute her own signal, she could convince the lock that it was receiving a valid biometric reading from an authorized maintenance worker. The modification took nearly an hour to complete, and Sarah's hands were shaking by the time she finished. If she had made any mistakes, alarms would sound throughout the security center, and her career, and possibly her freedom, would be over before she could explain herself. But when she carefully activated the bypass circuit, nothing happened. No alarms, no flashing lights, no security teams rushing toward her location. The lock was now under her control. Sarah replaced the access panel and made her way back through the maintenance tunnels to the diplomatic corridor. The hallway was empty, as she had expected during the station's night cycle. Most diplomats kept regular schedules that aligned with their home world's day-night cycles, and the Thelians were naturally diurnal. Standing in front of the door to Velvis Prima's quarters, Sarah took a deep breath and activated her bypass circuit. The door's biometric scanner glowed softly, then flashed green. The lock mechanism cycled, and the door slid open with a barely audible whisper. Sarah stepped inside and immediately activated her portable light source. The quarters were larger than her own, but modestly furnished, with furniture designed to accommodate Thelian physiology. Crystalline formations that served as both decoration and communication devices were arranged throughout the main room, and the air held a faint mineral scent that Sarah associated with Thelian presence. She moved quickly to what appeared to be a work area near the main window. A desktop terminal sat on an elegantly curved desk, surrounded by data storage devices and several pieces of technology that Sarah didn't recognize. This would be where Velvis Prima kept her personal and professional records. Accessing the terminal proved to be surprisingly easy. The ambassador had apparently trusted the station's security systems to protect her quarters, because her personal files were secured only by a basic password system. Sarah's experience with maintenance databases had given her a good understanding of how most beings chose their passwords, and her third guess, Zara's full name in Thelian script, proved correct. The terminal activated, displaying a complex interface in both Thelian symbols and standard galactic text. Sarah navigated to the personal log section and began scanning through entries from the past several weeks. What she found there made her blood run cold. According to Velvis Prima's records, the ambassador had discovered that someone within the human delegation was deliberately sabotaging the resource allocation negotiations. The sabotage wasn't random. It was carefully designed to make it appear that the Thelian government was negotiating in bad faith, while actually protecting the economic interests of specific human corporations. The ambassador had documented several incidents where proposals had been mysteriously altered between drafts, where crucial information had been leaked to competitors, and where meeting schedules had been changed without notification to create conflicts and missed opportunities. Most damning of all, she had recorded evidence of direct communication between certain human delegates and corporate representatives who had significant financial interests in maintaining the current resource allocation system. But the most shocking discovery was the identity of the person apparently orchestrating the sabotage. According to Velvis Prima's investigation, the primary culprit was Deputy Trade Administrator Marcus Chun, one of the highest-ranking humans in the delegation. Chun had been using his position to ensure that the negotiations failed, thereby preserving lucrative mining contracts that his family's business consortium held in several disputed territories. Sarah scrolled through the evidence that Velvis Prima had gathered, communication logs, financial records, and detailed analyses of how specific decisions had benefited Chen's associates. It was comprehensive, methodical, and absolutely devastating. If this information had been presented to the Galactic Council, it would have destroyed Chen's career and potentially implicated dozens of others in a massive corruption scandal. No wonder someone had been desperate to stop the ambassador from speaking. Sarah copied the entire directory of evidence to her portable storage device, then continued searching through the ambassador's files. In a folder labeled Personal Safety Concerns, she found communications between Velvis Prima and several colleagues expressing worry about threats she had received. The threats had started subtle. Questions about her family's safety, suggestions that she might want to consider returning to Thel Prime for health reasons, but had gradually become more direct. The final entry in the ambassador's log was dated the morning of her arrest. It was brief, but chilling. Chun has made it clear that he will take extreme measures to prevent me from presenting my evidence to the council. I have transmitted copies of all relevant documents to encrypted location for safekeeping. If anything happens to me, Zara must be protected at all costs. She is innocent of these adult conflicts and should not suffer for my dedication to justice. Sarah stared at the screen for several seconds, processing what she had just read. Velvis Prima had known that she was in danger, had taken steps to preserve her evidence, and had been primarily concerned about her daughter's safety. This wasn't the behavior of someone planning to commit espionage. This was the behavior of someone who had discovered corruption and was trying to expose it despite personal risk. A soft chime from her communication device made Sarah's heart skip. Someone was trying to contact her using the emergency frequency that Elena used for the child care center. Sarah quickly copied the ambassador's personal safety files to her storage device and shut down the terminal. Sarah, Elena's voice was tense with worry. You need to get back here immediately. We have a problem. What kind of problem? Sarah asked, already moving toward the door. Security teams just conducted a routine inspection of the child care center. They were asking about unregistered alien minors and wanted to know if we were currently caring for any Thelian children. I told them no, but they seemed suspicious. Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. If security was specifically looking for Zara, it meant that someone had realized the child might be a potential problem. Maybe they were concerned about what she might have overheard, or maybe they simply wanted to ensure that all potential witnesses were under official control. Where's Zara now? Sarah asked, carefully sealing the ambassador's quarters behind her and deactivating her bypass circuit. Hidden in the secure playroom with the other children. I told them all that we were playing a special hiding game and that they needed to be very quiet. But, Sarah, I don't think I can protect her much longer if they come back with proper search authority. Sarah was already running through the corridors toward the child care center, her mind racing through possibilities. If security found Zara, the little girl would likely be placed in protective custody, which, given the political situation, would probably mean isolation and interrogation designed to determine what she might know about her mother's activities. But Sarah now had something that could change everything. The evidence in Velvis Prima's files proved that the ambassador was innocent of the charges against her and identified the real culprit behind the diplomatic crisis. The question was how to present this evidence in a way that would be taken seriously and acted upon quickly. As she reached the child care center, Sarah realized that she was facing a crucial decision point. She could try to hide Zara and work quietly to clear her mother's name, but that approach would take time they might not have. Alternatively, she could take a much more dramatic and risky approach, one that would force the issue into the open and demand immediate action. Elena met her at the entrance to the center, her usually calm demeanor replaced by obvious anxiety. "They'll be back," she said without preamble, "probably within the hour with authorization to search everywhere." "What did you find in the ambassador's quarters?" "Proof that she's innocent," Sarah said, "and proof of who really committed the crime she's accused of." "But, Elena, getting this evidence to the right people is going to be complicated. The person who framed Velvis Prima is Deputy Trade Administrator Chun, and he has enough authority to suppress anything that threatens him." Elena's eyes widened. "Marcus Chun? But he's one of the most respected humans in the diplomatic corps. His family has been involved in interstellar trade for generations, which is exactly why he had so much to lose if the ambassador exposed his corruption," Sarah said. "Elena, I need to see Zara. I need to explain what's happening and what we're going to do about it." They found Zara in the secure playroom with 3 other alien children, all of them sitting quietly in a circle while playing a complex pattern game that involved arranging colored stones in specific sequences. When she saw Sarah, Zara's skin immediately brightened with relief and hope. "Did you find something to help my mother?" she asked, standing up and moving towards Sarah. "Yes, I did," Sarah said, kneeling down to Zara's level. "Your mother was right to be worried about someone trying to hurt the negotiations. But the person who was causing problems made it look like she was the one doing wrong things." Zara's skin cycled through several colors before settling on a determined golden hue that Sarah hadn't seen before. "What are we going to do?" Sarah looked at this brave little girl and realized that her next decision would affect not just their immediate safety, but potentially the relationships between entire civilizations. If she chose wrong, she could make the situation worse for everyone involved. But if she chose correctly, she might be able to not only clear Velvis Prima's name, but also expose a corruption network that could affect countless lives across the galaxy. "Zara," Sarah said, "I'm going to tell you about a plan that will either save your mother or get us both in very serious trouble. But I want you to understand that whatever happens, I'm going to keep my promise to protect you." As Sarah began to explain her idea, she realized that she was about to commit to a course of action that would test every ounce of courage and determination she possessed. But looking into Zara's trusting eyes, she knew that some promises were worth any risk. Sarah's plan was audacious in its simplicity and terrifying in its potential consequences. Instead of trying to work through official channels that Chun could control or influence, she was going to force the truth into the open in the most public way possible. During the next day's full Galactic Council session, the Council Chamber was the heart of Nexus 7, a massive amphitheater where representatives from dozens of species gathered to debate policies that affected billions of lives across the galaxy. Every session was broadcast live to news networks throughout known space, and every word spoken there became part of the permanent diplomatic record. If Sarah could get into that chamber with Velvis Prima's evidence, she could present the truth to the entire galaxy simultaneously. Chin would have no opportunity to suppress the information, and the political pressure for immediate action would be overwhelming. The problem, of course, was that Sarah had no legitimate access to the council chamber. She was a maintenance worker, not a diplomat, and the security around council sessions was absolute. But she had spent 3 years learning every inch of Nexus 7's infrastructure, and she knew something that most people didn't, The chamber's holographic projection system was maintained through service corridors that connected directly to the main technical control room. The projection system displays evidence and documents for the council members, Sarah explained to Zara and Elena. If I can access the control room during a session, I can override the system and display Veldis Prima's files for everyone to see. Once the evidence is public, Chen won't be able to cover it up. Elena looked skeptical. Sarah, the technical control room is one of the most secure areas on the station. How could you possibly get inside? The same way I got into the ambassador's quarters, Sarah said. Every secure system has maintenance access points. I just need to create a legitimate work order that gets me into the area legally. And then? Zara asked, her skin showing patterns of nervous anticipation. Then I present the evidence, explain what really happened, and demand that your mother be released immediately, Sarah said. The council will have no choice but to investigate, especially with the entire galaxy watching. Elena shook her head slowly. Even if you can get into the control room, what makes you think they'll listen to you? You're not a diplomat or a lawyer. You're just a human, Sarah finished. Which is exactly why this might work. The evidence against Veldis Prima was presented by humans, and the corruption it exposes involves humans. If another human steps forward with proof that the charges are false, it carries weight that testimony from other species might not have. Zara moved closer to Sarah, her small hand reaching out to touch Sarah's arm. Will this really save my mother? Sarah looked down at the little girl and felt the weight of the promise she had made. I don't know, sweetheart, but it's the best chance we have. They spent the rest of the night preparing. Elena helped Sarah create false maintenance records that would justify her presence near the council chamber, while Zara worked with Sarah to organize her mother's evidence files in a way that would be clear and compelling to beings from different species with varying cultural backgrounds. As dawn approached, or what passed for dawn on a space station, Sarah realized that she was about to attempt something that could end her career, result in her imprisonment, or potentially cause a diplomatic incident that would affect the entire galaxy. But when she looked at Zara, who had fallen asleep curled up in one of the childcare center's small beds, she knew that none of those considerations mattered more than keeping her promise to a scared little girl. The Galactic Council session was scheduled to begin at mid-cycle, approximately 6 hours after the start of the station's daily routine. Sarah spent the morning completing her regular maintenance duties, tried to maintain the appearance of normalcy, while her stomach churned with anticipation and fear. 2 hours before the session was scheduled to begin, Elena brought Zara to meet Sarah in one of the service corridors near the council chamber. The little girl looked tired, but determined, her crystalline skin showing steady golden colors that Sarah had learned indicated resolve and courage. I want to come with you, Zara said immediately. Absolutely not, Sarah replied. This is going to be dangerous enough without putting you at risk too. But they need to see me, Zara insisted, her skin brightening with urgent yellows. If I'm there when you show the evidence about my mother, everyone will understand that this isn't just about politics. They'll see that there's a real child who needs her mother back. Elena nodded slowly. She's right, Sarah. The visual impact of having Veldis Prima's daughter present when you reveal the truth about the frame-up would be powerful. It would make the situation personal for the council members, not just another abstract diplomatic dispute. Sarah looked between Elena and Zara, weighing the risks. If she was caught attempting to breach council security, she would face serious consequences. But if Zara was with her, the penalties could be even more severe. On the other hand, Zara's presence would indeed make the situation more compelling for the council members. All right, Sarah said finally, but we do this exactly the way I plan it, and if anything goes wrong, you follow Elena's instructions without question. Deal. Deal, Zara said, her skin now showing patterns of determination mixed with gratitude. They made their way through the service corridors toward the technical control room, Sarah leading the way with her maintenance equipment and legitimate work orders. The closer they got to the council chamber, the more security checkpoints they encountered, but Sarah's credentials and Elena's presence as a childcare supervisor provided sufficient explanation for their movement through the area. The technical control room was located directly above the council chamber, connected to the main amphitheater by a complex network of projection equipment and communication systems. Sarah had performed routine maintenance in the room before, and she knew that during council sessions, it was staffed by only 2 technicians who monitored the holographic displays and communication systems. But when they reached the access corridor leading to the control room, Sarah discovered that her planning had a serious flaw. The corridor was blocked by 2 security guards who were checking credentials of anyone attempting to enter the technical areas during the session. Maintenance request for the projection array, Sarah said, presenting her work orders to the first guard. We've been having intermittent problems with the resolution matrix, and the council specifically requested that it be resolved before today's session. The guard examined Sarah's credentials and work orders carefully, then looked at Elena and Zara with obvious suspicion. Why are you accompanied by childcare staff and a minor? Sarah felt her heart racing, but forced herself to speak calmly. The child is Ambassador Velvis Prima's daughter. She's been staying in the childcare center since yesterday, and we're taking her to observe her first council session as an educational experience. It wasn't entirely a lie, Sarah reasoned. They were planning to take Zara to observe the session, just not in the way the guard would expect. The second guard checked something on his portable terminal, then nodded to his partner. The ambassador is currently detained pending legal proceedings, so the child would indeed be staying in alternative care. Educational observation is permitted for diplomatic family members, even under current circumstances. Sarah felt a surge of relief as the guards stepped aside to let them pass. But her relief was short-lived when she realized that the technical control room was more heavily staffed than she had expected. Instead of 2 technicians, there were 4 people working at various monitoring stations, plus a supervisor who was clearly in charge of the session's technical operations. Can I help you? The supervisor asked as Sarah, Elena, and Zara entered the control room. Routine maintenance on the projection array, Sarah said, once again presenting her work orders. I need to access the primary display controls to recalibrate the resolution matrix. The supervisor examined the work orders with a frown. These are dated for tomorrow's session, not today's. Sarah's mind raced. If the supervisor checked the maintenance database, he would discover that she had falsified the work orders. But before she could respond, Zara stepped forward and spoke in clear, carrying Standard Galactic. Please excuse the confusion, she said with the formal politeness that diplomatic children were taught from an early age. The maintenance request was expedited at my mother's specific request. Ambassador Velvis Prima was concerned about potential technical difficulties during today's important resource allocation presentations. The supervisor looked at Zara with surprise, clearly not having expected such mature communication from someone so young. Your Ambassador Velvis Prima's daughter? Yes, sir. I am Zara Velvis, and I am here to observe my first council session as part of my diplomatic education. The supervisor's expression softened immediately. Of course, young lady. Please, make yourselves comfortable. The session will begin in approximately 1 hour. As they moved toward the projection control stations, Sarah marveled at how Zara had handled the situation. The little girl had instinctively understood that her status as a diplomatic child would open doors that Sarah's maintenance credentials never could. But now came the difficult part. Sarah needed to wait for the right moment during the session to override the projection system, and she needed to do it in a way that would capture the council's attention without giving the technical staff time to stop her. The session began precisely on time, with representatives from 43 different species taking their seats in the vast amphitheater below. Sarah watched through the control room's viewing windows as the Thelian delegation took their places, a smaller group than usual, she noticed, probably due to Velvis Prima's absence. The first several hours of the session were devoted to routine business, trade reports, territorial boundary adjustments, and procedural matters that were necessary, but not particularly dramatic. Sarah forced herself to wait, knowing that her intervention would have maximum impact during the resource allocation discussions that were scheduled for late in the session. Finally, Council Chairman Vorthka announced the beginning of the resource allocation hearings. The main viewing screens activated, displaying charts and graphs that illustrated current distribution patterns and proposed modifications. This was the moment Sarah had been waiting for. She moved to the primary projection control station and began accessing the override systems. The technician working at the station looked at her with mild curiosity, but didn't interfere. Maintenance work during sessions was unusual, but not unprecedented. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings, Chairman Vorthka's voice echoed through the chamber below. We will now hear the final presentations regarding proposed modifications to the Outer Rim resource allocation protocols. Sarah took a deep breath and activated her override sequence. The charts and graphs on the main viewing screens flickered and disappeared, replaced by the first page of Veldis Prima's evidence files. The reaction in the chamber was immediate. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as delegates realized that something unexpected was being displayed. The technical supervisor moved towards Sarah's station, but before he could reach her, Sarah activated the control room's communication system. Her voice echoed through the council chamber, carried by the same speakers that normally broadcast the session proceedings. Honorable council members, Sarah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. My name is Sarah Martinez, and I am a human maintenance worker aboard this station. I am here with Zara Veldis, daughter of Ambassador Veldis Prima, to present evidence that will prove the ambassador's innocence of all charges against her. The chamber erupted in surprised conversations, but Chairman Vorthka called for order with sharp authority. This is highly irregular, his amplified voice declared. Security, please escort these individuals from the control room immediately. But Sarah was already displaying the next set of files, the communication logs that showed Chen's coordination with corporate representatives. Deputy Trade Administrator Marcus Chun has been deliberately sabotaging these negotiations to protect his family's business interests, she announced. The evidence I'm showing you proves that Ambassador Veldis Prima was framed because she discovered his corruption and was planning to expose it. In the chamber below, Sarah could see Chun rising from his seat in the human delegation, his face clearly visible on the monitors as expressions of shock and anger crossed his features. But she could also see other delegates leaning forward in their seats, studying the evidence displays with obvious interest. Zara stepped up to the communication microphone beside Sarah. When she spoke, her young voice carried clearly through the chamber, and the translation systems conveyed not just her words, but the emotional undertones that made her plea unmistakably genuine. Honorable council members, Zara said, my mother is innocent. She has spent her entire career working for cooperation between our peoples, and she would never betray that trust. The human Sarah has risked everything to bring you proof of my mother's innocence because she made a promise to help me. This is what humans do. They keep their promises, even when it's dangerous. The security teams had reached the control room, but Chairman Vorthka called out to them before they could act. Wait, his voice commanded. Let them finish presenting their evidence. This council will hear all relevant information before making any decisions. For the next hour, Sarah systematically presented every piece of evidence that Veldis Prima had gathered. The corruption network was more extensive than even the ambassador had realized, involving not just Chun, but several other key figures in both human and corporate hierarchies. When Sarah finished, the chamber was silent for several long moments. Then, Chairman Vorthka spoke in measured, formal tones. This council finds the evidence presented to be credible and compelling. Deputy Trade Administrator Chun, you are hereby suspended from your position pending a full investigation. Ambassador Veldis Prima will be released immediately, and all charges against her dropped. The chamber erupted in conversations as delegates began discussing the implications of what they had just learned. But Sarah was only aware of Zara, who was crying again, not with sadness this time, but with relief and joy. You did it, Zara whispered, her skin blazing with brilliant golds and silvers. You saved my mother. We saved your mother, Sarah corrected, putting her arm around the little girl's shoulders. You were the brave one, Zara. I just kept a promise. 3 hours later, Sarah and Zara stood in the station's main docking bay, waiting for Ambassador Veldis Prima to be released from detention. When the ambassador finally appeared, her reunion with her daughter was a moment of pure joy that transcended species barriers. Watching them embrace, Sarah felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with the commendations and praise she had received from the council. Later that evening, as the three of them shared dinner in the station's diplomatic dining hall, Veldis Prima turned to Sarah with an expression of profound gratitude. "You risked everything for a child who was not your own and a woman you had never met," the ambassador said. "Why?" Sarah thought for a moment before answering. "Because someone needed help, and I was in a position to provide it. Because promises matter. And because—" She looked at Zara, who was happily eating crystallized fruit while her skin showed contented patterns of soft blues and golds. "Because sometimes the most important thing you can do is prove that different kinds of people can trust each other." Veldis Prima nodded slowly. "You have given my daughter something more valuable than her mother's freedom," she said. "You have given her proof that beings from different worlds can choose to care for each other, even when it's difficult." As Sarah walked back to her quarters later that night, she reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few days. She was no longer just a maintenance worker trying to save money for a return to Earth. The council had offered her a position in the Diplomatic Security Division, recognizing that her unique combination of technical skills and moral courage made her valuable in ways that traditional diplomatic training could not provide. But, more importantly, she had discovered something about herself that she hadn't known before. She had learned that she was capable of keeping the kind of promise that required her to risk everything she had for the sake of someone else's child. She had learned that sometimes the most ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they chose to act on their principles rather than their fears. And she had learned that the universe was full of beings who, despite their vast differences, shared certain fundamental values, like the belief that children should be protected, that families should be reunited, and that truth should triumph over corruption. The next morning, Sarah received a message from Earth. Her sister's wedding had been beautiful, and the entire family was proud of what Sarah had accomplished. But, more importantly, her sister had included a note from their young niece, who had been following the news broadcast from Nexus 7. "Aunt Sarah," the note read in a child's careful handwriting. "Mommy told me you helped an alien little girl find her mother. That was very brave. I hope I can be that brave someday, too." As Sarah read the note, she realized that the most important part of her promise to Zara hadn't been saving the ambassador or exposing the corruption. The most important part had been showing a scared child that someone cared enough to help, regardless of the cost. And that lesson, the knowledge that beings from different worlds could choose to protect each other's children and fight for each other's families, was something that would ripple outward through the galaxy for generations to come. Sometimes, Sarah thought, as she prepared for her first day in her new job, the most important promises were the ones that reminded the universe of its better angels. And sometimes, keeping those promises was what made the difference between a galaxy where different species merely coexisted and one where they truly became family.